Welcome, everyone, to our NCAA social series. I'm Andy Katz. I'm pleased to be joined by Derrick Coles, who's got a new job. He's back with the NCAA in a new role, a very much needed role. He is currently, because who knows, things change constantly, a new role. The new position is the Associate Director of NIL Development. That is name, image, and likeness. Before I peel back the onion on all of that, let's just educate everyone on where you've been, because you are a second-time guest here way back in November of 2020. At the time, you were at the Atlantic 10 as an Assistant Commissioner for Compliance and Student Services. That's when you left the NCAA in 2021. So actually, you were at the NCAA, then went to the A10, back to the NCAA. So just tell me about your journey to get back here in 2023.
Yeah, well, it's good to see you again, Andy. But yeah, it was definitely a unique situation with the pandemic. Obviously, in the current space at the national office, I was the Assistant Director of Agent Certification and Development, and then the pandemic happened. Some life changes happened. My beautiful wife, we had twins in the middle of the pandemic and wanted to get closer to home, but also had a interest in working at the conference level. So it was great, thankfully, for Bernadette McGlade and Jill Redmond at the Atlantic 10 allowed me to come in to be Assistant Commissioner of Compliance and Student Services. But as that happened, July 1st, 2021 happened and NIL began. And I think just with the landscape and how so many things happened during that time, I think the national office needed someone to be in that space to understand the landscape more and have some more subject matter expertise. So I had the fortunate opportunity to continue to keep in contact with my good colleagues at the NCAA who reached out to me about the interest of this position and thought it had my name all over it. Very familiar with the NIL space, previously working in the agent space. And so opportunity presented itself, applied, and here we are now in the current role as a Associate Director of NIL.
All right, so one other question before I want to get into this specific job, but what did you learn about NIL? You mentioned from the agent space and then at the conference level. What did you learn about name, image, and likeness in those two groups that you can apply at the national office?
Yeah, great question. Great question. Yes, I think initially working with agents before this, NIL really began, have an opportunity to have established great rapport and relationships with agents to kind of pick their brain about what NIL may potentially look like in the future. And with those discussions, they kind of told me, that agents would be very heavily involved in the NIL space. And guess what? They're correct. Agents are very highly involved in NIL space, but also from a conference perspective, having an opportunity to work with 15 outstanding institutions within Atlantic 10, seeing their concerns from the ground with education, with helping student athletes understand what NIL stands for, but also to understand creating institutional policies to manage the state laws on campus as well. So I think being at the national office, I provide some intel from the agent space, but also understanding what many of our schools are dealing with on each and every day when it comes to NIL as protection of the institution, but also providing the proper essential programming for our student athletes as they could try to find ways to maximize their opportunities within the NIL landscape.
And actually, I think working in the A10 is probably a great precursor to the NCAA because it is a league with a wide swath of institutions with different financial, endowments. I mean, just you name it. They're just as different levels within the league that I think you probably would learn a lot about, just the amount that would be available to each individual student on different kinds of campuses. All right, so now at the national office, and I know it's been a brief time here, but what are you hearing from coaches, student athletes, administrators about the impact that NIL is having already in just a brief amount of time on campuses?
Yeah, I think it's once again another great question. I think for me, just first day I took this role, I hit the ground running. I think just talking to as many coaches and administrators as possible, Currently, coaches and administrators have been very open and transparent about NIL and how it impacts their program and campus. Coaches have shared that NIL has definitely changed the way they recruit prospective student athletes. Instead of talking to parents and coaches, college coaches are now talking to agents who represent these PSAs. I think also coaches have shared NIL has impacted the retention of the student athletes on their roster. Had a few coaches tell me during the Final Four that, there's been student athletes coming in that office and talking about, their entering portal because of the lack of NIL opportunities at their current institution. And I think from athletic directors, they have shared that NIL is the most important topic they're dealing with on campus. Just trying to provide the proper NIL programming and staffing in an effort to give the student athletes the best opportunity to excel in these uncharted territory of NIL. And then student athletes, I think from their perspective, they just want the team guidance. I think from their perspective, they're looking for ways and education to make sure that they're doing things the proper way, but also trying to maximize their opportunities within NIL. I think many of them see some of the newsletters out there, they're reading what's happening on social media, and they're trying to find a way, how can I also maximize my opportunities to make some money as well within NIL?
And also, of course, it's fact versus fiction. A lot of numbers
Yes.
are thrown around, whether it's within the mainstream media, social media, within recruiting, that a lot of times are not true. So a lot of these student athletes have to get the correct information. As we are taping, it is April. And what happens in April? Tax time. I've already seen some student athletes post about, hey, don't forget about taxes, which relates to education. So because it is April, I'm curious on that topic. How have you had to try to educate student athletes, administrators, coaches, about that tax question?
Well, in my role, technically, I don't really provide information in that regards. But the conversations I have been having, just understanding that, the issues that could potentially happen if they don't put forth the effort to make sure the student athletes are filing taxes. Obviously, our good friends in the government can easily come on campus and talk to those student athletes to make sure that they don't do what needs to be done. Then obviously they can have some ramifications for not submitting taxes. But also, I think from my lens, I think it's needed for our student athletes to file taxes, because I think what's happening is disclosures. And, I think the issue is we don't know, like you stated before, the numbers are all over the place. And I think when you submit, file your taxes, then I think it understands kind of what our student athletes are actually making within the NIL space. Right now, everything is so fabricated, and it's so much unknown of what our student athletes are actually making. So I constantly encourage our, administration and coaches to allow, to encourage their student athletes to file for taxes. I think it also helps the student athlete, number one, stay out of trouble, but also two, gives us more of a understanding of what our student athletes are actually making in the NIL space.
Look, I think people have to admit when they're wrong. And I do think the critics of NIL prior to it being enacted was, it's only going to help the high-profile sports, football and men's basketball. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Clearly, female athletes are benefiting, in a great way for them personally, whether it's women's basketball, gymnastics, volleyball, you name it. I mean, there's so many opportunities for female student athletes, other male student athletes, not in the high-profile sports. What have you seen about those opportunities across the entire athletic department in that, that overall student athlete population?
No, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think just watching the women's basketball tournament this year was awesome. I'm a big supporter of female sports, and I think this year was amazing, just the success and the exposure they received. And comes with that was NIL opportunities. And I think they thrived this past March and April in that space. And so it's been a joy to watch. It's been a joy to hear the great stories within female sports. And also, too, I think so many people are so focused on the negative stories about NIL, but it's so many great stories, so many great things happening in the NIL space from every level of Division 1, 2, and 3. I think, you think you just stated female sports, you think I recall talking to a female swimmer who, since NIL was effective July 1st, 2021, created her own swim line. And she's been very successful in that space. Also had a chance to hear about a men's lacrosse player that benefit from NIL, becoming a digital creator and has over 194,000 followers on social media platforms. And also, too, I've seen other great stories about student athletes using their name, image, and likeness to give back to the community and provide for charitable donations and organizations. And so I think it's great to see that NIL doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a face to it. If you have the opportunity, I think this space allows you to thrive in it. And so you don't have to be an outstanding athlete in your sport. I think the intention of NIL was for people who are creative, who were able to think outside the box and create things. This was what NIL is for. And I think there's a lot of great stories that definitely need to be publicized and pushed out, because I think NIL is great for our student athletes. And we're starting to see a lot more great stories out there that our student athletes are monetizing. So it's great to hear and great to see.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because there are a lot of great stories of student athletes giving back. It's not all greed. Paul Mulcahy at Rutgers, I was thinking about this one where his last game, he took some of his NIL money and gave gift cards to everyone that works in the arena, just regular people who are working in the arena, in addition to managers. And, whether it was the custodians, you name it, he was handing out gift cards to give back to people who had helped him, which is a great gesture, obviously, of using that money. And the other point clearly is that we know that, men's basketball and football can be two of the highest professional earnings, but there are a lot of sports in the NCAA portfolio where professionally you cannot make as much money. So these student athletes at the college level certainly can benefit when they're at this age, because they may not be able to make that much money as a professional. But guardrails is sort of the term that everyone's looking for, because we do have different laws in different states, and not all 50. Obviously, new President Charlie Baker has spoken about this, about going to see, and has already visited Congress. There is congressional action. Well, whether or not we'll ever see it to legislation, we'll have to wait and see, of trying to have something that's uniform. Until that happens, there has to be someone, to just be a sounding board. And obviously that can be you, a resource. How can you be that resource at the national office for student athletes, coaches, administrators in the name, image, and likeness space?
Right. And you're totally right when it comes to just, President Baker has been very open and honest about consumer protection is needed. And, just hearing all the horror stories out there, I could sit here for hours and tell you the crazy stories I've heard from, student athletes, parents, and coaches about what's student athletes being taken advantage of in this NIL era. But I definitely agree with some of the things that I can be a resource for, is, helping, the national office. When he talks about, President Baker mentioned creating a public agency registry, generating a standard contract, and, certify NIL providers. I think in my role is to be a resource. I want to help schools identify the bad actors in this landscape. Hopefully I can develop internal and external education programming and materials related to NIL. And going back to my original charge, I want to be a professional listener for the membership. I want to hear their concerns, possible solutions, right? Because we serve the membership. And so hearing what the membership has to say about potential solutions to kind of put some of the toothpaste back in the tube as a reference. I want to do my very best is to bring information back to the national office so we can protect our student athletes as they navigate this space. And so 100% for what you just mentioned about how can we continue to protect our student athletes. And so I think that's kind of my charge as a resource to help the membership out, is just be a professional listener, hear their concerns, and see how we can accommodate those with the proper guardrails to protect our student athletes and our programs.
Hey, I got one other thing that, and stop me if this is sort of off the grid a little, but it struck me what you said earlier about, what coaches are saying, and I've heard this myself within the portal of, I'm going to go to this school because they can offer this, NIL ways. earlier there was so much talk about recruiting inducements. It shouldn't be used in that manner, but that was more from high school seniors to college. Yet it's also being a recruiting inducement within the portal. So I'm just trying to understand the difference between the two of a recruiting inducement to get on campus as a freshman versus a recruiting inducement to transfer.
Yeah, great question. All that's all under the same umbrella, because it goes back to, and I'm not gonna get my AMA friends could definitely help me out in this space because I'm not interpretive, but it falls under the bylaw 13. When you're a high school student athlete, you're getting recruited, but once you get back in the portal, you're getting recruited again, and so it's still considered an inducement because of the fact that coaches not only see a high school prospect as opportunity for them to find, utilize collectives and things of that nature to rear in a student athlete, a prospective student athlete, but also too from a standpoint of a student athlete in the portal. How can I recruit that student athlete to our school? And so you hear the stories about, unfortunately, some tampering in play, coaches or other individuals associated with the student athlete. It's been tampering before their name gets in the portal. And some of our student athletes, unfortunately, are listening or being tampered with and are encouraged to get in the portal because of the fact of potential NIL opportunities at the next institution. And so I think that goes hand in hand and just trying to find a proper way to have coaches or other individuals share that information. Once again, just trying to find those bad actors in the space to, to have everyone plays on the same level playing field, and so my goal is for us to continue to find information about who's in this space taking advantage of these student athletes by encouraging them to go in the portal because of NIL, but also from a PSA perspective, recruit a kid to come to your school because of NIL. Once again, that wasn't the intent of NIL, and so we're just trying to continue to do our very best to get all the information we can and once again try to eliminate those actions from happening in this collegiate space.
All right, so now I just want to wrap it up like this. You get all this information. You're going on a listening tour. People are calling you, emailing you. We don't know what's going to happen with Congress. So when you gather all this information here in the spring, summer, what do you want to do with that next year with all that you've gathered?
Yeah. So, in my role, I'm an information gatherer. And so, I am under enforcement, but I definitely have connection and legs to other departments under the national office. I'm happy to share with my colleagues in academic membership affairs, which is also stand for AMA, also communications, and then my great friends at Office of Legal Affairs. And so I just gather as much information as needed and share it with those departments to help them understand the NIL space more and what kind of guardrails we need, but also what kind of structure we need to help our membership out. But when it comes from an enforcement standpoint, just the information is collected. If the information I receive ties into a potential violation, then within the enforcement group, I share that with my colleagues in investigation and processing, and they create cases and find ways to push it through to the process of the infraction process. So for me, it's more of just, once again, just gathering information and then placing it to the right people within our national office. And so hopefully this can, be a way for us to look at this time next year of things being much easier. People understand more of what they can do and not do, but also too, hopefully we can kind of have some guardrails in place based off the information I received this spring and this summer to see a different perspective and a different way of looking at NIL moving forward for next year. So that's the goal, that's the charge, and looking forward to reaching out and seeing as many people within the collegiate landscape. Like I said, I'm a listening ear. Whatever you have to tell me, I'm willing to hear, and let's get this work together to make NIL better for our student athletes. And so, we can eliminate the bad actors, but also to enjoy the good stories of what's happening within NIL for our student athletes in our programs.
And I'm glad you said that at the end, because we do not want this to come across like there is, only a punitive part of this, because from what you're saying, look, it's here. There's a lot of benefits. People have benefited. There's the good, and then there's those that have been taken advantage of. So you want to make sure that everyone gets the right information, can maximize their potential, their earning potential, obviously during their time as a college student athlete. So Derrick, you are there. People can contact you, I believe, is that correct? Within the membership?
Yes. Any and all. I can talk to anybody.
All right, I don't want everyone coming at you. I just want to make sure you're good with that. All right, so Derrick Coles, he's got a new gig. You can contact him within the membership, student athletes, coaches, administrators. You can get, he's on a listening tour. He wants to hear what is happening across the college landscape. Appreciate your time, Derrick.
Thank you so much, Andy. Take care.
All right, as always, you can go to ncaa.org/social series, where all our social series are archived. We've got tremendous conversations like this and have been doing this all since even before Derrick was a first-time guest back in March of 2020. We are going strong. Appreciate it, everyone.